The declaration of independence within the human psyche begins not with a quiet realization, but with a public confrontation of the chaos that has taken up residence in our internal halls. If we look at Book 2 of the Odyssey as a psychological map, we aren't just reading about a young prince in ancient Greece, we are looking at the exact moment the developing will decides to stop tolerating its own stagnation. In the esoteric tradition, this chapter is the assembly of the self. It is the moment you stop letting your thoughts run on autopilot and finally call your mental faculties into the light of conscious awareness to evaluate what, exactly, is draining your energy. We are moving from the spark of awakening we saw in Book 1 into a gritty, defiant resistance against the ego. It's the stage where you realize that your internal palace is being occupied by lower desires and ingrained habits, and for the first time in 20 years, you find the voice to say, enough. Part 1, the assembly of the mind. To understand why this assembly is such a radical act, we have to look at the state of Ithaca when Book 2 opens. For nearly 2 decades, there has been no formal gathering of the people. The seat of authority has been empty. In our own lives, this represents those long stretches of time where we live without true mindfulness. We go through the motions, letting our impulses and social conditioning, the suitors, dictate how we spend our time and where our attention goes. When Telemachus, guided by the divine intuition of Athena, calls this assembly, he is performing the act of focused introspection. He isn't just talking to people, he is gathering his scattered mental energy into a single point of focus. Now, look at the symbols here. Telemachus is the will. He is still young, still developing, and he feels the weight of his father's absence. His father, Odysseus, represents the I am, the true self, the master of the house who has been missing. When Telemachus takes his father's seat in the assembly, he is attempting to assert authority over his own nature. It's that feeling you get when you finally sit down to meditate or start a new discipline, and you try to be the boss of your mind. But as anyone who has tried to break a habit knows, the internal status quo doesn't go quietly. Enter Antinous. He is the lead suitor, and esoterically, he is the dominant ego state. He's arrogant, defiant, and deeply invested in keeping things exactly as they are because he's currently the one eating the livestock and drinking the wine of your mental resources. When Telemachus stands up and demands the suitors leave, he is met with a very specific kind of pushback. Antinous doesn't just say no, he pivots. He blames Penelope. This is a classic ego defense mechanism. Penelope, representing the soul or the subconscious mind, has been using her famous trick, weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's father during the day and unweaving it at night. Antinous argues that she is the one leading them on, that she is the reason they are still there. From a psychological perspective, this is the ego projecting its faults onto the subconscious. When you try to change, your ego will argue that your nature or your past or your subconscious patterns are the real problem. It justifies its presence by claiming it's only there because you haven't made a clear choice yet. The ego refuses to take responsibility for the drain on your energy, instead pointing at the shroud, the work you are doing internally, and calling it a deception. Penelope's weaving is actually a beautiful symbol of the soul's purity. By unweaving at night, she is stalling the ego's demands, waiting for the return of the true self. She is refusing to finish the death garment that would finalize the ego's victory. Part 2, the omen and the ego's defiance rite in the middle of this standoff, we get one of the most striking omens in the entire epic. Zeus sends 2 eagles down from the mountain peaks. They fly over the assembly, and then, suddenly, they turn on each other, tearing at each other's faces and necks before disappearing. An elder prophet named Halitherses, who is skilled in reading the signs of the higher realms, stands up and gives a chilling interpretation. Odysseus is near. He is coming back, and when he does, there will be a massacre. The suitors are warned that their time is running out. This omen represents a flash of spiritual discernment. It's that moment of clarity you get when you realize that your current way of living is unsustainable and that a higher version of yourself is preparing to reclaim the throne. But look at how the suitors react. They don't repent. They don't even get scared. Eurymachus, another lead suitor, mocks the prophet. He says birds fly around all the time, and it doesn't mean anything. He basically tells the old man to go home and tell his omens to his children. This is the height of the ego's arrogance. When we receive a sign or a moment of deep insight that tells us we need to change, our lower nature often dismisses it as a fluke or a coincidence. The suitors represent those deeply ingrained negative habits that have become so comfortable in our psyche that they think they are invincible. They believe they own the house. They ignore the warnings of the prophet, which is our own conscience or higher wisdom, because they cannot conceive of a power greater than their own immediate desires. This is the friction of personal growth. You cannot simply argue with these parts of yourself. Telemachus realizes this as the assembly breaks up in chaos. He sees that his words, no matter how righteous, aren't enough to evict the occupiers. Part 3, Setting Sail and Shifting Consciousness. Telemachus realizes something crucial here. You cannot heal a troubled mind using the same level of consciousness that created the trouble. Arguing with the suitors, arguing with your own negative thoughts, actually feeds them. It gives them energy. Every time Telemachus yells at them, they just laugh and eat more. So he does what we must all do when we hit a wall in our development. He detaches. Guided by Athena, who is now disguised as Mentor, an old friend of his father, Telemachus prepares to leave Ithaca. This is the setting sail. Esoterically, the ship is the will detaching from its current environment and its sensory limitations. He isn't running away, he is seeking higher truth. He is going to Pylos and Sparta to find news of his father. In terms of our own journey, this is the moment we stop obsessing over our problems and start pursuing the Father, the higher spiritual knowledge and maturity that will eventually give us the power to solve those problems. There's a very grounded, practical scene here involving Eurycleia, the old nurse. She's the one who stayed loyal, the one who truly knows the history of the house. Telemachus asks her to prepare provisions, wine and barley meal, and he makes her swear a secret oath not to tell his mother he's leaving for 10 or 12 days. He wants to spare Penelope the grief, but more importantly, he needs to make this move in silence. There's a lesson there about protecting your early stages of growth. When you're trying to shift your consciousness, you don't always need to broadcast it. You gather your provisions, you find your crew of supportive ideas or practices, and you set sail in the middle of the night, while the suitors of your mind are asleep or distracted. Part 4, The Legacy of the First Step. By the end of Book 2, the ship is on the water. The wind, sent by Athena, is filling the sails, and the crew is pouring libations to the gods. Telemachus has transitioned from a boy who sat in the corner of his own house feeling sorry for himself to a leader who has secured a vessel and a mission. He has moved from a state of passive suffering to active seeking. This is the declaration of independence because he has finally separated his identity from the chaos of Ithaca. He is no longer defined by what the suitors are doing to him. He is defined by what he is doing to find his father. This chapter reminds us that growth is often noisy and messy before it becomes transformative. You will have to face the Antinius in your own head, the voice that tells you that you're a fraud, that your soul is the problem, or that you'll never change. You'll have to see the eagles fighting and trust that the higher part of you is indeed on its way back. But ultimately, the real victory in Book 2 isn't winning the argument in the assembly. It's having the courage to leave the dock. It's the realization that if the environment of your current mind is toxic, you must build a ship and find a new horizon. You don't wait for the suitors to leave, you outgrow them by seeking a higher state of being. If this deep dive into the architecture of the mind resonated with you, consider sharing this perspective with someone who is currently navigating their own internal assembly. This episode is finished, but the journey through the psyche continues.